The 20th century was a time of incredible change. Unspeakable horrors and amazing leaps of scientific discovery. It was a century where we showed what we are truly capable of. The pure imagination of artistic expression. The insidious desire to harm and oppress. The will to fight against the weight of a prevailing status quo. The drive to understand the universe and to improve our lives. A century made by leaders and revolutionaries, scientists and thinkers, artists,
wait till you see Muhammad.
icons, heroes, and villains. We will count down through the 101 figures of the 20th century who have shaped the world in which we live, and whose stories form the tapestry of our history. On this episode,
his corruption and the length and breadth of his violations helped undercut faith in government itself.
She became a sort of icon. She was as ubiquitous as Mae West, but very few people had actually seen her perform in America.
The San Francisco Chronicle hailed him as a genius for this working demonstration of an electronic scanning television.
Perhaps the most bizarre crime of the 20th century involved the case of Charles Manson, a self-proclaimed savior. Manson had attracted a family of fanatical followers who obeyed his every command and led them to commit the most publicized and barbaric murders of our time.
My feelings are good. This is a chance. The sun was out this morning, you notice it?
the Summer of Love, 1967. Over 100,000 people descended on the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco, there to celebrate a shared ideology of peace and love, discarding inhibitions and rejecting the establishment. Among them was a young Charles Manson.
The 1960s have been romanticized around the world. This is the era of rebellion, of freedom, of the counterculture, when people tuned in and dropped out. Charles Manson is like the dark archangel of the 1960s. He is the evil force that lurks beneath the unleashing of desire and freedom amongst youth culture, particularly in Southern California.
It was here Manson practiced his paranoid lectures and honed his ability to draw people to him.
When Charles Manson was putting his family together in the 1960s, we had people who did not stick to the traditional family structure. And so when he called his family the family, he was putting a kind of patriarchal imprint on a different social formation. In other words, Charles Manson was the leader of a cult.
In 1968, Manson and the family moved to the Spahn Ranch, an old abandoned ranch used for filming westerns and TV shows. Over July and August 1969, Manson sent his family members to brutally murder targets around Los Angeles. In the early hours of August 9, they entered the home of Hollywood actress Sharon Tate and her husband, film director Roman Polanski. There, they violently murdered Tate, who was 8 months pregnant, and 4 other people. The next night, family members killed Leno and Rosemary LaBianca in their home. The murders sent shockwaves through America. Their brutality and the profile of the victims made the case particularly disturbing. The trial itself was a media circus.
As the story unfolded, the public became appalled and yet fascinated with Charles Manson, an unimpressive-looking man who was somehow able to attract a fanatical following and lead them to barbaric destruction.
I think the spectacular nature of the trial had a very big effect on people's perception of Charles Manson because they got to hear him speak. We heard in the trial his theory of helter-skelter, which was his apocalyptic vision of a race war in the United States that was revealed to him through the Beatles' White Album.
I'll let you ramble a little bit, but I'd like you to stick to suitability.
Is that what you call it, rambling? It's okay if I talk?
No, I'm allowing you to say.
You see 9 dead people. That's not even the tip of it. That just set one little blaze to this thing that you call helter-skelter.
Manson was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder for his role in directing the murders of the Tate and LaBianca victims. Other family members involved were also found guilty of murder. Manson's ability to influence his family members to carry out terrible acts of brutality remains a chilling source of fascination. He has grown into an icon of the macabre, the evil and insane.
Charles Manson has endured as an iconic figure because of his involvement with the 1960s. In effect, he ended them.
From an early life of poverty, she rose to become one of the most influential, the most adored, but also one of the most hated women in Argentina. Eva Duarte came to Buenos Aires when she was 15 years old. She aspired to be an actress, but it would be her politics that set her on the path to fame.
I think she had all the conditions to become a myth because she was born in a very, very poor family in a marginalized society. She understood what it was like to be very poor with no access to education, no access to facilities, to medical services. So she was determined to change that.
Eva had just started a political radio station in 1944 when she met Colonel Juan Perón. A year later, the pair married, and Juan Perón entered the 1945-46 presidential race. Eva was right at his side, a political figure in her own right.
People saw her as the Lady of Hope, as a savior, and one of them, because she came from very poor origins, so she understood them.
When her husband was elected president, Eva was active in his administration.
Eva Peron has been well in the news. Here she is arriving in Rome, where, as wife of the President of Argentina, she was accorded a great reception.
While Eva never held any official position, she took responsibility for health and labor and government aid, a cause that was close to her own heart.
She was never talking about charity. She changed that into justice. I'm giving you what you deserve. It's yours. It wasn't giving away, it was giving back. And that made her loved and hated.
Perón's critics referred to her as that woman and dismissed her as a power-hungry, cheap actress. In reality, Eva was a passionate politician and feminist. She worked tirelessly to improve conditions for women and helped pass into law the right for women to vote in Argentina. By 1951, Eva was terminally ill with cancer.
Following the first of a series of hopeless operations, she showed the unmistakable marks of her losing fight against the dread disease.
Her death on July 26, 1952, at 33 years old, was mourned by millions.
And the sadness of her passing has evoked sincere and widespread grief throughout the country. Enshrined in the hearts of millions as Argentina's national heroine, she is remembered now as the President's brilliant partner, Evita.
She was seen as the savior of the working class, giving her life for their cause.
There are different elements or different facets to Eva Peron. You can have the saint and the myth, you can have the political, powerful woman. At the same time, I think there are a lot of people that don't really know a lot about her. They know the musicals, they know the movies, which are more based on fiction than on reality.
Eva Perón's true legacy is in her influence on politics and society at a time when women had little true power.
She could have been the first female president, but, her health didn't let her. It would be very interesting to see what she could have achieved if she had had the chance.
Nazi-occupied Poland. Millions of Polish citizens, along with thousands of Catholic priests, had already been sent to their deaths in hard labor and concentration camps. Universities and seminaries were closed. The Nazis were stamping out any sign of culture in Poland. one young Pole would be undeterred, embarking on a career in the Catholic Church that would one day see him be Pope.
A Pope has been elected, but for the expectant world, a shock. The new Pope is non-Italian, the first for 456 years. He's Cardinal Karol Wojtyła, the first Pope from a communist country.
The elevation of Karol Wojtyła to the papacy in 1978 came at a time of political turmoil. The world was deep in the midst of the Cold War. Eastern Europe was beyond the Iron Curtain of communism, and human rights abuses were taking place around the world. Pope John Paul II wasted no time in his efforts to start drawing together a dislocated world.
John Paul II is known as a conservative theologian, but socially he's a progressive, with the easygoing manner of the first John Paul.
In his first year as Pope, John Paul visited Poland. Crowds of over 1 million people openly congregated to hear the Pope talk about individual and national freedom. A year later, the labor movement Solidarity was born. Claims of the Pope's direct impact on the fall of communism vary, but his presence in Poland at that time reminded the Polish people of their own collective power.
His mission, as he sees it, is to carry the Christian message to the common people of the world. He has traveled around Europe, Asia, and the Americas. For millions of ordinary people, he is the only celebrity they have ever seen, and from him they have drawn faith and inspiration.
In 1981, the Pope leaned out of his car to greet the throng of people in St. Peter's Square. As he reached out to touch their hands, he was shot 2 times.
The Pope slumped back in his special jeep. One bullet had struck his left hand and right arm. The other had smashed its way straight through his body.
He survived the attack and, undeterred, continued to travel the world from behind bulletproof glass. He was the first Pope to visit a synagogue and a mosque, working to bridge the gap between religions. At his heart, the Pope was a humanist. He believed in the sanctity of life and opposed the death penalty. But this also meant that he opposed abortion, contraception, and euthanasia.
The Pope urged the young to respond with a yes to life, saying, like the young people who feted Christ in Jerusalem, you must be his people, the people who say yes to life.
He also drew criticism for affirming the Church's position of not ordaining female priests, a stance that kept him out of step with the attitudes of many Catholics. Despite this controversy, Pope John Paul II helped to usher the world and its almost 1 billion Roman Catholics through a period of significant global change, fostering a greater sense of connectedness between all religions and all countries. He was a pioneer of special effects in cinema, exploring the power of film to transcend the everyday world. His creativity laid the foundation for filmmaking as an art form of the 20th century. Before he discovered the world of film, Georges Melies worked in Paris as a stage magician, mastering the art of illusion. Until in 1895, the Lumiere brothers came to Paris to screen their first films. Méliès was among the audience.
When he heard about moving pictures, he was right there at the front of the queue. He was there on the first night of the Lumiere brothers showing their new invention in Paris. And of course, the first thing that Méliès said was, "Can I buy one?" Seeing that it could be tremendous as a kind of adjunct to magic performance.
A year later, Méliès had bought himself a camera and was making his own films. But these were not scenes of the everyday. Méliès built elaborate, detailed sets, wrote scripts, and hired actors to play out his fictional stories, exploring the technical capacity of film to create illusions, bringing the theatrical into the world of film.
In France, film pioneer Georges Melies and his trick camera amazed and baffled American movie makers. How did he do it, they asked?
He discovered extraordinary properties of film, which really are the basis of the idea of film as magic. Film is showing us something which we can't see by any other means.
Méliès was a pioneer of modern filmmaking techniques. He experimented with stop motion and slow motion. The first split screen, where actors perform opposite themselves, featured in one of Méliès' films, as well as the first dissolve. He was the first to use multiple exposures to create a ghosting effect on the images.
And this principle of multiple exposure, sometimes 6, 7, 8 multiple exposures, allowed him to create the most extraordinary imagery. Things of really different sizes all appear to be part of the same frame. The texture of Méliès' films is very rich, very heavily worked. It really looks like the world of the late 19th century illustration brought to life on the screen.
By the time Méliès died in 1938, he had made over 500 films.
Méliès has always been regarded as the patron saint of cinema as fantasy. If the Lumière brothers stand for cinema as documentation, what's in front of us, what's in front of the camera, Méliès is exactly the opposite. And so, in many ways, Méliès is extremely influential on what we regard as cinema today, especially the cinema of special effects, of fantasy, of beyond anything that we've ever experienced.
From socialist revolutionary to one of the most controversial political figures of the century, he fought for his vision for a modern country made by the people, for the people. In the final years of the 19th century, revolution was brewing in Russia. An emperor whose dynasty had spanned hundreds of years ruled the country. But discontent among the working class was leading to calls for political reform. A young Vladimir Lenin, a self-declared Marxist, was among those calling for change.
Lenin was the founder of the Bolshevik Party, which was itself a splinter group from a bigger Marxist socialist party. They tried to set up little circles, sort of propaganda circles, in Russia, mainly for workers in the big cities. Now, the police are always after those circles. They arrest people. They're often short-lived.
Protests and opposition to the emperor, Tsar Nicholas II, rose and fell for nearly 2 decades, until the First World War and Russia's heavy losses created the conditions for revolution. By March 1917, the people were war-weary, and the army was on the verge of mutiny, when striking industrial workers in St. Petersburg led riots and clashes with police.
A demonstration in St. Petersburg starts over a simple demand for a higher bread ration, gets out of hand, includes a new demand, transfer of power from the Tsar to an elected parliament.
When the army overwhelmingly defected to the workers' cause, the emperor was forced to abdicate, all while Lenin was living in exile.
The German General Staff arranges for the return of Lenin. Leon Trotsky arrives a month later from Canada. But in November, Lenin and Trotsky call for destruction of the Republic.
In 1917, Lenin is the man who doesn't want to cooperate with other revolutionaries. Everyone else is talking cooperation, and he's the intransigent one that says we can take power on our own.
Lenin overthrew the provisional government in a coup d'etat known as the October Revolution. 3 years of civil war followed. Lenin squashed any hint of rebellion using his secret police and the army, a campaign that would become known as the Red Terror.
My sense is that while Lenin felt that any kind of toughness and violence is justified in the revolution, he probably didn't think that the revolution goes on forever. He might have backed off had he lived longer.
In 1922, Lenin became leader of the newly formed United Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR. But Lenin's health was in decline, and the Communist Party's General Secretary, Joseph Stalin, was amassing power. In 1924, Lenin passed away, having never truly achieved his vision for his country. The legacy of Russia in the 20th century is the story of how Lenin orchestrated massive social and political change, and what Stalin did with the newly created state. Lenin played a crucial role in guiding the country into the new century. From post-revolutionary interim government, through a violent civil war, to Soviet Union positioned to become a global superpower. From a childhood in poverty to the greatest soccer player in the world, he would be the first player to become a millionaire in a career built on his love of the game and an unparalleled talent. Edson Arantes do Nascimento, or Pele, made his World Cup debut at 17 years and 239 days old. A figure etched into history when he became the youngest goal scorer in World Cup history. In a sport where a team would score an average of 2 to 3 goals per game, Pele was a master of goal scoring.
It was like watching a magician. He was magical on the pitch. And the way he just pounced on those balls to score those goals, he was like a panther. He was absolutely incredible.
Pele holds the record for the most goals in a set period of time, 1,281 in 1,363 games. His incredible statistics have been attributed to his approach to the game. Pele was agile and had amazing ball handling skills.
He was just an absolute genius. He could weave in and out of players with ease. He was graceful, he was fast, and just absolutely beautiful to watch.
His gameplay was creative and unusual. He would play an all-out attack on the other team's defenses, rather than the traditional defense-driven style of play. This revolutionary style made his games more exciting for fans to watch. Pele's popularity was as much about his enthusiastic attitude to the game as it was about his talents on the field.
I think the thing about Pele is that just he was also a gentleman on and off the pitch, and he was revered. He just went on and he proved himself through his football. He was someone that was much loved by everybody.
Pele's rise to fame in the soccer world coincided with another important development in the sport: television. The 1970 World Cup was the first to be televised worldwide in colour. Some have attributed his lasting recognition to this important cultural change. There were many parts that went into the making of Pele, the sporting hero. The sum of these parts is one of the greatest soccer players who ever lived, and one of the most celebrated figures of the 20th century. He spent decades fighting for his country's independence, navigating the turbulent political ideologies of the 20th century. Ho Chi Minh was a small, thin man with an untidy goatee, always seen wearing his personal uniform of worn jacket and tattered rubber sandals. He was the carefully constructed, benevolent Uncle Ho.
Dr. Ho Chi Minh in these first films lives up to the descriptions, depicting him to be a scholarly old gentleman.
Behind this image was an experienced revolutionary, intent on achieving independence of his country from French control. For decades, he led the Vietnamese nationalist movement. But it would be the turmoil of World War II that presented Ho with the opportunity he needed. When France was defeated by Germany in 1940, Japanese forces quickly invaded Vietnam, known at the time as French Indochina. In response, Ho established the League for the Independence of Vietnam, known more commonly as the Viet Minh. The Viet Minh took advantage of the retreating Japanese in 1945, entering the northern city of Hanoi and declaring North Vietnam as the democratic state of Vietnam, with Ho Chi Minh as president. French forces took the southern half of the country, including the city of Saigon, launching a campaign to take back the north. In November 1946, the French shelled the city of Haiphong, killing hundreds of civilians. By December, the Viet Minh had declared war. A war that seemed to end with the decisive victory of the Viet Minh over the French.
This was the scene in Hanoi as Viet Minh troops marched through the city after the takeover by their leader, Ho Chi Minh. To the Indo-Chinese people watching the parade, the occasion may have seemed as much a triumph for their nationalist movement as it was a communist victory.
It would in fact be the first step towards the involvement of the United States in Vietnam. First as advisors, then through active military combat that began in January 1962.
The communists set out to liberate the South, and America, as the champion of the free world, accept the obligation to stop them, at any cost.
In 1965, this expanded to include airstrikes by America against North Vietnam targets. By the time America had become involved in Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh had stepped down as leader. But he remained an important symbol of what they were fighting to achieve. In pursuit of Ho's unified Vietnam, the country was rocked by war and instability, positioning Vietnam as the battleground for competing Cold War ideologies. Ho Chi Minh was rigid in his beliefs, despite the cost. Whether he was ultimately fighting for a free Vietnam or to further the spread of communism, there is one truth that holds. He was anything but the gentle, benevolent Uncle Ho. An Australian sporting legend. His prowess on the field was so infamous and threatening that his competitors would go to any lengths to beat him.
What makes a talented sports person is a combination of the gifts you are born with and the way that you nurture those gifts. And Don Bradman was one of those people that had those gifts, exceptional gifts.
Don Bradman was one of the greatest cricket players the world had ever seen. Earning a name for himself in Australia as a batting powerhouse, Bradman gained a new level of notoriety when the Australian team took on the English in the 1930 Ashes Test. The Ashes had for decades been the pinnacle of the cricketing rivalry between England and Australia.
This is two countries at war, England and Australia. You know, this is not fun, this is not just sport.
With Bradman on the Australian team in 1930, they decimated the English. Bradman alone scored a total of 974 runs, breaking the Test batting record.
I've never started out to break any records. I've always tried to do the best I can for the team that I'm playing for. Records or no records, I'm looking forward to the time when I can come back again to England, which I'm hoping to do someday.
When the English came to Australia for the next Ashes series in 1932, they were prepared for Bradman.
He was just something that was so different between the teams. You get Bradman out, you could win. If Bradman didn't get out, you would lose. Simple as that.
The English captain, Douglas Jardine, planned to employ the controversial bowling practice known as leg theory. Bowling the ball fast and short, right at the batsman's body, while fielders clustered close to the batsman on their leg side. The goal was to intimidate Bradman and gain the upper hand. But behind the theory was a real threat.
In those days, you didn't have anything like headgear, and it was just life at hand. You get hit right in the head, we know now. You can die from a cricket ball hitting you in the wrong spot in the head or in the neck.
When the English team started to use leg theory against the Australians, it was not received well by the crowd.
It was at this point in the game that Woodfull was unfortunately struck on the heart by a ball from Larwood which got up.
Woodfull, the Australian team captain, was not the only victim. Another short bowl hit batter Bert Oldfield in the head, fracturing his skull.
Bill Woodfull said that there are two teams out there and only one of those teams is playing cricket. And I think that's the way the rest of Australia saw it.
The shocking tactics were seen around the world, making that Ashes series in 1932 an infamous moment in cricket. All to try and contain the unstoppable force that was Don Bradman. Over his career, Bradman's batting average was 99.94 runs per innings, the highest of all time. Many of his records remain unbeaten to this day.
To me, Don Bradman was everything that sport stood for, and I think it had a tremendous impact across the world, whether it be in India, West Indies, Pakistan, England, Australia. Everyone revered the great Don Bradman.
We're hoping to win, but still, may the best team win, that's all we are.
He was a mastermind of science fiction, publishing some of the most influential works in the genre, whose vision brought about one of the most important scientific developments of the 20th century. Arthur C. Clarke is one of the most enduring names in science fiction writing. His work and influence on the genre was not limited to his novels. Clarke worked with film director Stanley Kubrick to adapt his short story The Sentinel to film. The result was 2001: A Space Odyssey. Released in 1968, it remains a classic of science fiction and one of the most referenced works in popular media.
He was much beloved in the world of science fiction. In addition to that, Arthur C. Clarke was a very creative engineer/physicist, and he wrote a paper in which he laid out the principles of being able to have broadcast signals that would cover the entire Earth, provided you put a satellite some 20,000 miles above the surface of the Earth at what's called the geostationary point.
But it would be 20 years before the ideas Clarke laid out in his paper would become reality. During its development, Clarke worked with American scientists and engineers to design systems to launch and transport the satellite.
We have, as a species, come to depend on this wheel of satellites sitting at the geostationary point, because it is those satellites that allow us to have nearly instantaneous coverage of what's going on anywhere on the globe.
Communication satellites have changed the world, and they've made it one world. The long-heralded global village is almost upon us, but it will last for only a flickering moment in the history of mankind. Before we even realize it has come, it will be superseded by the global family.
What Arthur C. Clarke set in motion has turned into an enormous economic impact that the entire world uses, that they don't even realize is being used, and is something that everybody that's got a cell phone or a GPS system uses every day.
The distance of around 36,000 kilometers above the Earth's equator is known as a Clarke orbit, in honor of the man who first imagined its possibility. Arthur C. Clarke was a visionary whose work proved that we are only limited by our creativity, revealing the evolutionary path of an idea from our imaginations to the everyday, the path from science fiction to science. When a young Polish girl moved to outback Australia at the end of the 19th century, she could not have imagined the multi-billion-dollar industry that would grow from this decision. When Helena Rubinstein arrived in Australia, her soft, pale European skin was in stark contrast to local women, ravaged by the sun and dust of the Australian climate. They were desperate to know her secret. What was probably the good fortune of her native climate she instead attributed to the homemade face cream she had brought with her from Poland. So began the making of an empire, the business of beauty, built on promises and luxury, exploiting the desire to appear young and vital.
The idea that she made that connection so early on as to what women wanted, you know, that desire that women want for skincare, it's quite extraordinary. What a great success story.
Rubinstein understood the lure of perceived luxury and the influence of pricing and branding on building this perception.
We have the money to spend, and we want all the lovely smelling soaps, lotions, and glamour goo we can get with it. What we pay for our cosmetics is simply an index to our tastes, our pocketbooks, and our environment.
Rubinstein was adept at weaving elaborate fabrications around her products and herself. She would say that the face cream she sold in the early years of her business was made from rare herbs and found only in the Carpathian Mountains. In the early years of her business, she devised the idea of problem skin, classifications that require specific diagnosis and treatment with a selection of her products.
She very cleverly cottoned onto the idea that if you use the idea of science and the idea of a diagnosis for someone's skin, you could sell them a face cream which may not have been anything much more than lanolin.
Rubinstein was skilled at building a mythos around her products and her brand, and it sold. By the time Rubinstein died in 1965, her empire was worth $100 million, and her company was part of a thriving cosmetics industry. She built an empire on the idea that beauty is power. Her legacy endures in every cosmetic advertisement that hints at an elaborate science or an esoteric origin of its ingredients. She was a titan of her field, paving the way for a global juggernaut that has changed the lifestyle and the purchasing habits of women around the world. Television, a technological advance that radically changed our lifestyles and revolutionized the way we access information. A forgotten name whose work made it all possible. When Philo Farnsworth was 15 years old, he sketched an idea to show his high school chemistry teacher. An electronic tube that Farnsworth envisioned would scan and dissect an image for transmission. This idea was the basis for electronic television. It would take until 1927 for a 21-year-old Farnsworth to gain the money and resources to put this idea into practice. On September 7 that year, he successfully made the first electronic television transmission, demonstrating it for the press in 1928.
The San Francisco Chronicle hailed him as a genius for this working demonstration of an electronic scanning television, which used basically a cathode ray tube to scan an image, turn it into little dots of light, and transmit it.
A dynamic industry employing more than 1 million. Television, an unparalleled blending of science and art, invention and engineering, private incentive and public service.
RCA, the Radio Corporation of America, was heavily invested in creating and commercializing this new innovation. In 1930, they approached Farnsworth to purchase his technology. When he refused, the company launched a series of protracted legal battles to gain ownership of Farnsworth's patents, effectively delaying the development of television for years. The court ruled in favor of Farnsworth, undisputedly the inventor of electronic television. RCA had to pay Farnsworth a fee to use his patented technology. But in 1947, Farnsworth's key patents expired, just in time for RCA to capitalize on the post-World War II television boom.
For many years, he was a little bit forgotten and to some degree pushed out of the way by the Radio Corporation of America, which really basically commercialized television. The name RCA and names associated with RCA are the ones that have tended in the past to get more recognition.
Behind the product that RCA was so effective at promoting was Philo Farnsworth's genius and pure inventiveness. A mind capable of linking the process of ploughing lines in a field with Einstein's photoelectric theory to conceive of electronic television. One of the last great lone inventors, Farnsworth was an underdog in the struggle to invent and control one of the most influential inventions of the century. A presidency fraught with inherited challenges, governing through a period of social change, ending in a scandal that would rock the nation.
No politician is dead until he admits it. Nixon said it, and by golly, Nixon was right. 6 years after defeat for the governorship of California, with his political career apparently in ruins, Richard Milhouse Nixon has made a fantastic comeback.
Richard Nixon came to office in 1968, his second attempt to win the presidency. The nation was demanding change. Women were marching for equal rights, and civil unrest and protests over racially motivated violence and inequality continued to rock the nation. America had been in active combat in the Vietnam War for 6 years, and protests against the war were at their peak. Nixon was determined to achieve what he called peace with honor in Vietnam.
I shall consecrate my office, my energies, and all the wisdom I can summon to the cause of peace among nations.
By March 1973, the last American combat troops had left Vietnam. Nixon was also intent on advancing America's diplomatic relations, making historic visits to both China and the Soviet Union in 1972.
I think Nixon wanted to be a statesman, and he felt that a trip to China was the best way for him to really underline himself as a statesman.
This was the week that changed the world.
The other thing that people say is only Nixon could have done it. Only a hardened Cold Warrior could have walked away from decades of sort of right-wing rhetoric about China to say we will profit more by engaging with China than we will with denying that they exist.
1972 also saw Nixon campaigning for re-election.
According to the opinion polls, he's so far ahead of his Democratic rivals that he doesn't even need to do any campaigning.
In June of that year, a group associated with his campaign broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate building in Washington. It soon came to light that members of Nixon's administration knew about the burglary.
I had no prior knowledge of the Watergate break-in. I neither took part in nor knew about any of the subsequent cover-up activities. That was, and that is, the simple truth.
Secret tapes of White House conversations would later reveal that Nixon had been involved in attempts to cover up the crime. The events were so incredibly shocking and sensational, the word Watergate has since become synonymous with scandal.
Watergate is a whole set of things. It's a break-in at the Democratic headquarters. It's the use of dirty tricks in presidential campaigns. It's using the powers of the federal government to punish political enemies. It was really a fundamental perversion of the Constitution of the United States.
Under the growing threat of impeachment by Congress, on August 9, 1974, Nixon resigned the presidency. A year later, his successor, President Ford, gave him a full pardon.
I feel that Richard Nixon and his loved ones have suffered enough and will continue to suffer no matter what I do.
Nixon's presidency was a turning point for America. He effectively ended 2 decades of large-scale military interventions overseas. Yet the achievements that he made in his 6 years as president were ultimately overshadowed by his disgraced exit. He spent the latter part of the century working to redeem his image, but to some, he remains tarnished by his actions.
I think another part of what Nixon did was his corruption and the length and breadth of his violations of the Constitution helped undercut faith in government itself. And That is a very damaging legacy of Nixon and of his administration.
The 1920s was a decade of experimentation, and its beating heart was Paris. At night, the city came alive under the flashing lights of theatres and music halls. On stage, one star shone brighter than any other, drawing the crowds with her daring, risque performances. Josephine Baker debuted in the Paris nightclub scene in 1925. She immediately captivated audiences. Her most famous early performance involving dancing in nothing but a skirt made of bananas.
Josephine Baker was in many ways a trailblazer. She entered French popular theatre and she danced. And she danced in a way that nobody had ever really danced before.
Crowds flocked to see her energetic and expressive dancing, her brilliant comic flair, and her exotic looks. Baker became a huge personality in France.
Dancing was the new religion, and a Josephine Baker or any girl who could shake a mean hip was bound to succeed.
The 1930s saw her expand her repertoire to singing and starring roles in French feature films.
She became a sort of icon. Everybody knew what the image of Josephine Baker was. I mean, she was as ubiquitous as Mae West was, for instance, from Hollywood. But very few people had actually seen her perform in America.
In 1936, Baker returned to the United States. Her fame didn't spare her from facing hostility and racism that still plagued African Americans.
So her return to the United States was important because she was someone who had proven that black entertainers could have great success outside the United States, and it kind of highlighted the problems that black Americans were faced with inside the United States.
During World War II, Baker worked for French intelligence, earning some of France's highest military honors, the Croix de Guerre and Rosette of the Resistance. She was also made a Chevalier of the Legion of Honor. Baker returned to America after World War II, but would refuse to perform in clubs unless their owners desegregated the audience. In 1963, she took part in Martin Luther King's March on Washington, wearing her French military uniform and medals.
I think her presence kind of tied together an earlier generation of black people who had tried to resist in the ways they could in the 1920s and 1930s with a new generation of people, the King generation, so I think she was one of the symbols of that, passing the torch to a new generation.
Baker was a fighter, but she always returned to her roots as a performer. In 1973, she performed at Carnegie Hall in New York City. This time, she received a standing ovation. When she died 2 years later, she became the first American woman in history to be buried with French military honors. There were many sides to the legacy of Josephine Baker. Resistance fighter, civil rights activist, trailblazing performer.
And it's very interesting that she made only a handful of films. She's not really a film star, she was merely a live performer. But when two of her films were reissued in America a couple of decades ago, they got a fantastic review in the New York Times saying, we can really see in these films why she was such an electrifying performer. They'd lost nothing in 30 years. Absolutely extraordinary. The essence of what she stood for, which she managed to bring to the screen just a couple of times, somehow lives on.